Hello, how you doing? Thanks for looking in. I think this is going to be one of my last videos for a while. I've done so many on YouTube. I don't get that many viewings, mainly because I don't think my YouTubes get circulated that much, but also maybe they're a bit on the long side, or maybe people just don't find the topics interesting. I don't know, but and as well, I think I've got such a huge catalogue of a whole variety of YouTubes, and I'd urge you to have a look at them. All right, today's topic is a very difficult one, and it's quite a personal one, and I think it's personal to many of us, more people than we would like to believe, and I think it merits discussion. But my headline is that I would like us to take more steps to prevent domestic abuse from occurring and reoccurring, rather than and to prevent it from happening and to take early measures to do that. I was kind of encouraged to do this YouTube talk by YouTube. Actually, they reviewed one of my talks about domestic violence and said, well, how about talking a bit more about your experience of working with domestic abuse. I'm sure they kind of said, I'm sure viewers would be interested in hearing that. And I kind of bit my tongue a bit because, and it's tricky. One, because I've seen it at close range. When I was growing up, my parents were very, at times, went through very bad difficulties, and there were complete outbursts. And in a way, what was going on was quite complex and complicated, and different factors going on there. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. So it kind of worries me if people are incredibly simplistic, because I think, it's really tough. The other problem for me is that I began working for the probation service in the 1980s, and I qualified as a probation officer in the 1990s, and I didn't get a lot of training about dealing with domestic abuse, domestic violence. I did later in my career, but I think in those days, me and my colleagues, we genuinely worked hard to try and rehabilitate offenders. And I note in the press recently, in The Guardian, a number of ex-offenders, guys coming out of prison, have expressed concern that their supervision hasn't involved much rehabilitation work at all, if any, and that mainly they felt that they were being controlled and assessed, risk assessed all the time, rather than any positive work done with them. And my ethos has always was as a probation officer, was to motivate people, to encourage them to stop offending and to go in a positive direction in life. And I didn't work with many domestic abuse cases. It wasn't particularly my speciality, if you want. I tended to work with people with addictions and things like that, and I was very motivational. But I did work with a few perpetrators of domestic violence, and victims also, I may add. And this also, but I actually devised strategies linked to other theories and things that I came across. Some of them really old. I mean, one of them dates from the 1970s. And I'm going to attempt to explain these, but I must explain to you that these methods that I use were homespun, stuff that I devised myself, and actually I gleaned from various places, and I felt quite passionate about it. And believe it or not, some of the elements that I'm going to explain, I had very positive feedback from the ex-offenders, as it were, and they said they found some of my strategies extremely helpful, So I've never been a specialist in domestic abuse. I've seen it at close quarters whilst I was growing up. I've worked with it a bit, and I had some very good positive feedback about my methods that I actually used, and they were my own. They weren't a National Probation Service method, if you like. So I'm going to share them, and I'm going to lay myself open to criticism and people going, oh. But first of all, I must say that the important thing here is the victims, and we really need to ensure their future safety, and we don't want people re-victimised and more victims. And I would like to see the whole of society stepping up action, and to keep going in a positive direction to reduce domestic abuse. So I'm going to talk about my experience growing up. Was my parents, my mum appeared to have a lot of outbursts, and there were a lot of scenes, and there was shouting, alcohol misuse, and sometimes sleeping tablets or whatever misuse, accentuated and accelerated problems. It was like, pouring fuel on fire at times. There was abusive behaviour between both parties at times. It wasn't until later that I realised that there was a bit of power control going on, that my dad, in a cold and calculating way, was controlling my mother on several issues that she felt very strongly about, and she was rebelling. And she appeared to be the one making the outburst, the faulty party. But in fact, looking back on it now, I now realise on certain issues, one or two, that he was exceptionally over-controlling and didn't allow my mother a say in a couple of major decisions about, for example, my brother and where he went to school and things like that. And it really upset my mum. So that was perhaps a trigger. The other thing that complicates things is my parents went through incredibly difficult times. I could go on and on about it, but to cut a long story short, my dad's career was abruptly ended, and from being up there in life, he became exceptionally depressed and unemployable and things like that. And I saw the negative sides, that what society can do to somebody when they're down, and how they can get kicked and not hard to get up again. So, these sort of experiences have informed my kind of view. And from it all, I really believe in positive action early doors. I would like to see more emphasis on children growing up, learning good social skills, better social skills. And I think, unfortunately, due to media and all this, children are becoming a bit more isolated. And I like to see more social skills, more learning about abuse and how it happens. And people's attitudes are so important, their roles within relationships and their attitudes. And I'm going to come to that later. I would like to see all careers better educated about abuse, be it dentists, pharmacists, teachers. Everybody in society needs better education, not only while we're growing up, but all various professions that people come into contact with. I believe actually in early intervention, and people not ignoring neighbours shouting at each other and things like that, and then being reported. And then at that stage, perhaps then going to have some help, some sort of counselling or at that stage. And, things, attempts to sort issues early doors if possible. So I think, and it's amazing actually, as a probation officer, I dealt with a victim, and I'm going to tell this story now about this victim that I worked with. She was a female, and I think she committed some sort of offence at the behest of her partner. And when I think I helped a colleague with this case, and we were talking to our manager, and to our horror, when we checked out who her partner was, we found that he had committed similar that he had persistently been a domestic abuser with about 12 or 14 different victims, different women. And my manager felt strongly that this man could tell. He used to pick partners who were vulnerable, and he felt he could manipulate and control. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? And for me, it kind of came home that really, why hadn't somebody taken him to account and made efforts to stop him offending earlier? And I don't think anybody had. And it kind of really made me worried. And my colleague really tried hard to get this victim to take better steps to protect herself. And none of it really worked. So one day I had a session with her, and I showed her a video of, it was a general one talking about domestic abuse from a different perspective and the sort of work that's done with people abusers and how these people need help, really. And she looked at it, and it actually worked. And it, I came at the problem sideways rather than head on like this, as my colleague was going head on at it. I came at it sideways, and that sideways approach actually worked. So that's quite interesting. So I want to talk about my work experiences with some persistent, some offenders who had decided that they and their partners had decided to keep going in a relationship. And I really try to be very motivational. Now, I felt quite strongly as a probation officer is that the probation order, the supervision, needed to be a team approach, and that I needed to consult with them at the very beginning what sort of things they wanted to work on probation, and that we did an agreed plan. And I used to do an exercise, and it used to involve asking them what are the most important things in their life, and from that, this led into what things can we work on and what things can we make better. So often, one of the most important people in the person's life would be their partner. And that gave me a way in to how could we manage that relationship better and stop, this sort of incident occurring again. Very important as well was I often used to look at the person and say, we used to do like a positives test, a skills set, and look at what their positives were. Because if you're constantly putting somebody down, it can be quite counterproductive. And, I remember one colleague who shouted at somebody during the interview, and I thought that was very unprofessional. Some of my colleagues had real problems engaging with their service users, which I felt that was one of my strengths, and it was very important. And this was a way in. Now, most importantly, and this might surprise you, was I felt it very, very important to put over the victim's perspective of the offence that occurred. And one of the exercises I did, and I didn't necessarily do it straight away, we did the good points bit first, if you like, but I made them look at the offence, and it was quite hard, and I made them take the view of, to imagine, and I kind of did a role play with them, that they were the victim. And to do this, the technique that I used to use was to ask them to look at an object, not look at me, because if they looked at me, it might disrupt the thing and could be a bit embarrassing. But I made them look at the lamp and the lampshade, say, in the room, focus on that, and imagine that they were their victim. And I'd say this and that had happened. How did you feel? What did you feel about so-and-so saying this to you? What did you feel? And I thought that this was a very difficult exercise to do, but incredibly powerful one and a very worthwhile one to do. So that was quite a lovely one. Now, the other one that I used to do, and I'm going to show it very quickly, and I kind of nicked it off another theory. But this, I was kind of saying, is in relationships, we need to be on the level with partners and not the boss power and controlling down. And that some people are incredibly childish and childish reactions going on. And I've met a few people that are like child, and combative and trying to score points. But where we need to aim is to be on the level and making joint decisions and to be a joint team with one's partner. Now, and this included really breaking up the traditional roles and encouraging the person to take a more active role, helping, with some of the tasks, traditional tasks that might be attributed to one partner to the other, and to help each other, like cooking, helping wash the car, doing things as a team, and I felt this was really important. Now, part of that, and to really rule out any controlling behaviour, some of it actually was to do with people feeling insecure, and they felt, but actually you want your teammate here to, be able to go to college and get more skills and have a nice time. So I used to really look closely at this relationship and improving it. Now, one of the things that the main feedback I got from my offenders was they really liked this technique that I used to get them to do, and I'm going to explain it now, was I used to encourage them to listen carefully to what their partner was saying and to repeat back what their partner was saying from time to time. Now, this is incredibly powerful because a lot of the time we talk away and nobody appears to be listening. But if somebody's repeating back and acknowledging how you're feeling about something, a light bulb goes in the head and goes, wow, this person's listening to me. What a change. Now, this simple technique, so I'd encourage them to say, right, this week I want you to try this with your partner. Let me know how you get on with he or she, and repeat, so she might come in and say, oh, I had an awful day at work. And you say, oh, right, you had an awful day at work, did you? And I felt angry about this. Oh, so you felt angry about that. And it sounds, but, immediately you're being more supportive and like a team player, aren't you? And I encouraged other ideas, like choosing somewhere neutral where to go and talk. Amazing, actually, if you get out the house and actually go on a journey in the car, that can enable you to talk more sometimes. So it's amazing, isn't it, what you can do. Just going out occasionally, breaking the routine, just going for a walk or going and looking at the sea, or, going to see a film can be really, really therapeutic and helpful in a relationship rather than being stuck in a rut and so I used to encourage them to be family orientated and really think about the children. And really, life is short and we need to plan good times. We need to plan good experiences and good memories, create good memories for the future together. Now, they needn't cost money. Like me and my family, for example, we went up to Cambridge, we took a picnic, we kicked a ball around the green. We had a lovely family bonding time, and I'm talking about extended family here. And actually, none of us spent much, a bit of fuel maybe and the picnic, but we had a great time socialising together, yeah? So it's better to do some positive actions. I had a chap, for example, and his father was terminally ill. And I said, it's essential now that you do some lovely things with your dad that you and your dad will appreciate, and some positive things, rather than being angry and upset. Let's do some positive things together. So family focus, being focused rather than being selfish and being the boss, the power control. Let's be a bit more teamy with the family and think of them. And I think your partner's going to really appreciate that, and they often do. So that they found very helpful. often we used to talk about anger management strategies, and a simple one really is if you feel angry, go for a walk. Don't let yourself let off steam in front of you and get really angry. Go for a walk, put it in perspective, think about your partner's perspective when you go for the walk, come back and chill and talk sensibly, rather than explode and get violent or do irrational things or behave out of order. And this out of order behaviour that my parents used to do was outrageous. Actually, I saw them physically fighting. I remember on one occasion, and that's just so damaging. It made me quite insecure as an adult, I think. So then we used to talk about anger management. We talk about reducing stress, things like that. And for me, some people think that substance use and alcohol is an excuse, but I see it as an accelerant. It's like pouring fuel on a fire. That alcohol is a disinhibitor, and it's going to create even more problems. So I really encourage people to keep a good control on their alcohol. So anyway, these are my kind of ideas. I would love society to take domestic violence and abuse more seriously. I would love to see more focus on it, on how we grow up in the UK and how children grow up. I'd like people not to hold back on reporting when they hear it happening. I would like to see early interventions rather than it being ignored. And this all costs money, but early interventions, support for the victims early on, way out strategies and support for them, but also support for the perpetrators to get their behaviour right. Anyway, I hope it's a very, very long video. I can't expect many of you to go all the way you have, but do write in with your suggestions. I don't know everything. I'm not a know-all, but all I know is I tried really hard, and on occasion it actually worked, that my methods actually worked. There was something else, another exercise at the very beginning of probation was I often used to talk about the pros and cons of offending, quite briefly really, but it was to underline that if we keep going down this road, if you keep repeat offending like this, we're going nowhere. Things are going to get worse, really. And I felt at the very outset of the order, it was worth underlining this point just before we put a positive plan together. It kind of went together. So sorry, I forgot to say that at the very beginning, but hope you found it interesting. Do write in and do give your support, really. And do put forward your ideas for how we can improve and reduce domestic abuse in the UK. I think it's important, and we need to all look out for each other a bit more. Anyway, all the very best now, and see you again sometime. Cheers. Bye-bye.